All right, let's do this. Let's finish Frankenstein. It's been a good one. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have too. 2 chapters left. The fiend just killed Victor's wife. Brutally. Horribly. Awfully. Chapter 21. The worldwide search begins. I returned to Geneva to find my father and brother alive and safe, but the sad news I brought proved to be the final blow to my father's poor health. He simply couldn't go on living with the grief of the horrible deaths of his loved ones. Only a few days after my return, he took his last breath and died in my arms. This was the final blow for me as well. The death of William, Justine, Henry, Elizabeth, and now my father were too much for me and weakened my mind. I couldn't cope with it. I went completely mad and had to be locked up in a hospital for the insane for many months. When I finally awoke in my right mind, I was filled with an even greater desire for revenge than ever before. And this time, I was determined to do something about it. I tried asking for help from the police in Geneva. I told my whole story to a judge, not leaving out any detail. Although he seemed to believe me, he decided that the superhuman powers of the monster, plus the time that had passed since the murders, made it impossible for anyone to catch him. That left me with only one choice: to go after the fiend myself, even if it meant spending the rest of my life doing it. Gathering together all the money I had, I made plans to leave Geneva. But I asked myself, where should I go? The monster could be anywhere on the face of the earth. I began wandering through the city, and as night fell, I found myself at the cemetery, where William, Elizabeth, and my father were buried. I knelt at their graves and called out my vows to the heavens. I swear I will pursue the fiend who took the lives of those loving, innocent people and make him pay for his crimes. The stillness of the night was broken by a loud, fiendish laugh that deafened me as it echoed from mountain to mountain. When the laughter died away, a hated, familiar voice whispered, "I have had my revenge on you, just as I said I would. I have made your life miserable, just as you did mine, and you will live to be even more miserable." I darted to the spot where the voice had come from, but the fiend had fled with a speed that no human could hope to match. From that moment on, the pursuit had begun. With only a few clues to go on, I spent many months following the fiend throughout every continent. I followed him to Europe, Africa, and finally to Russia. Sometimes frightened peasants who had sighted him pointed out his route. Other times he himself left clues to guide me. He seemed to want me to suffer the agony of getting close and not capturing him. I found messages from him cut into the bark of trees or scratched into rocks. The more he taunted me, the more determined I was to continue on and have my revenge. Headed north into Russia, I found his last message. Wrap yourself in furs and prepare to suffer on a long journey. Your suffering will satisfy my eternal hatred of you. Wow. I bought a sledge and dog team, and I crossed the snow of Russia with amazing speed. I was only a day behind him when I reached a tiny village and learned that the night before, a huge monster had attacked the villagers. Threatening them with guns and pistols, he'd stolen their entire supply of food for the winter, plus a sledge and a dog team for crossing the ice. The villagers warned me, "Don't follow him. He headed out across the frozen sea. There's no land at all in that direction. You'll both be destroyed, if not by the ice breaking under you and drowning you, then by the cold freezing you to death." But I wouldn't take their warning. I had to have my revenge at any cost. I don't know how many weeks or months I spent on the ice, suffering unbelievable cold, thirst, hunger, and exhaustion. Then one morning, I reached the top of an ice mountain and discovered a dark spot moving on the frozen sea below. I lifted my telescope to my eye and cried out in triumph when I saw that the spot was a sledge Seated on it was a hideous shape I knew so well. Tears filled my eyes, and I wept for joy. I followed the fiend for 2 days, but I wasn't able to get any closer than the mile that separated us. But my hopes were suddenly dashed when the water under the ice began... But my hopes were suddenly dashed when the water under the ice beneath my sledge began to roll and swell. The wind picked up, blowing hard, and tossed me about as if I were in a tornado. Then, with a tremendous roar, the ice cracked apart, opening up deep, wide rifts like those in an earthquake. Those rifts instantly filled with water, forming a turbulent sea. That sea now separated me on a small piece of ice from my enemy, who floated away. Soon he had disappeared from sight, and I was left to die a hideous death. My sledge would be my coffin, and a black of ice my burial place. Well, I was on that ice, and I don't know how long it was. All my dogs except one died. My food was gone, and I was about to sink when I saw your ship. I had no idea that any ships came this far north. I broke apart my sledge to make oars and managed to move the block of ice closer to your ship. And although I was weak and close to death, I had decided that if you were heading south, I wouldn't come aboard. I preferred taking my chances on survival in the sea than let anyone stop me from pursuing my enemy. But if you were heading north, I let you rescue me. You saved my life, you and your men, and although I'm still weak from my ordeal, I do plan to continue my pursuit. Robert, my friend, that ends my story. I pray that I live long enough to find this terrible fiend and destroy him. But if I don't, if I die before I find him, you must promise to find him and take my revenge for me. Just remember, though, if he should appear before you, don't listen to anything he says. That fiend can be very persuasive. Don't trust him. Just kill him. Chapter 22, the last chapter. Frankenstein. Peace at last. Victor Frankenstein's strange and terrifying story was at an end. Robert Walden sat back in awe. He felt great respect as well as great sympathy for this young scientific genius. Still, his curiosity was aroused. Victor, he asked, now will you tell me how you formed this creature and how you brought him to life? Are you mad, Robert? What do you want to do, create another fiend like this one? Do you have any idea what would happen if someone did that? If another monster were let loose to terrorize the world, no one will ever know my horrible secret. It will die with me. Weeks went by with no change in the ice surrounding the ship. It still threatened to crush the small vessel to bits. Victor grew weaker and weaker each day, and now couldn't even get out of bed to look for the sledge or to get some air on deck. Then one day, a roar of thunder in the distance brought the entire crew out on deck. That roar signaled the cracking and splitting of the solid ice, the sea of ice. 2 days after that, a path wide enough for the ship to sail through opened up. They were free. When Captain Walton gave the order to lift anchor and set sail, a great shout went up from the crew. The overjoyed captain hurried down to the cabin to tell Victor that they were heading back to England at last. No, you can't go back, gasped Victor. You must help me find my enemy first. The captain shook his head sadly. I can't expose my men to any more danger. Please try to understand that. Victor, I can't put my ambition for exploration or your desire for revenge above the safety of all these men. Then go if you must, but I can't go with you. My mission isn't over yet. I know I'm weak, but I have to go on. With that, Victor tried to lift his frail body out of bed, but the effort was too great. He fell back on the pillow in a faint. When he regained consciousness, Victor had difficulty breathing and couldn't speak at all. The ship's doctor was called, and after examining the gravely ill man, he gave the captain the sad news. He only has a few hours to live, sir. I'm sorry. Robert sat by Victor's bed and stared, unmoving, at this man he had befriended. After a while, Victor's eyelids fluttered and he whispered, "Come closer, my friend, for I don't have much strength left. I know I'm dying, and I want you to know that my desire for revenge is gone. I realize now that I am to blame for deserting my creature after I formed him. Yes, you were. I should have seen to it that he had a better life, with happiness and love. But it's too late for that now. Now I have a responsibility to all mankind to see that this creature is stopped before he murders again. I can't do it by myself any longer, and I beg you, once again, to do it for me." With that, Victor grasped the hand of his last friend on earth. His lips spread in a soft, gentle smile, and his eyes closed forever. That night, as Robert was standing on deck, thinking about his friend, he heard a hoarse voice coming from the cabin where Victor's body lay in its coffin. Hurrying below deck, Robert flung open the door and found a gigantic creature bent over the coffin, weeping as he pressed Victor's cold, stiff hand against the long, ragged hair hanging over his face. Unearthly groans seemed to come from his soul as he wept. Seeing Robert at the doorway, the creature sprang towards the window. "Wait, stay," called the captain. The creature pointed down at Victor and said hoarsely, "He is my last victim. I only want him to pardon me now for destroying all the people he loved." Robert's first impulse was to follow Victor's last wishes and kill the creature, but something in the creature's voice aroused the captain's pity and curiosity. "If you had asked for forgiveness sooner, if you had stopped your murderous acts of revenge sooner, Victor would still be alive. Do you understand? This is all you're doing." "I hated what I was doing," replied the creature. "I was selfish and thought only of my own feelings. I admit it. But I wasn't always that way. I began life as a loving, sympathetic being. All I wanted was to have people ignore my ugliness and love me for the goodness inside of me. But nobody did. Nobody gave me a chance. All anybody showed me was hatred, and that was only because of my ugliness. Even the man who created me felt that way. Yes, that's what changed me. Yet there was a time when I pitied Victor Frankenstein, seeing the misery I had caused him. But when I learned that he was planning to marry and have a happy life for himself, after taking away any chance for one for me, my pity turned to a thirst for revenge." Robert listened to the monster, first with pity, then with suspicion. As Victor's warning echoed, he can be very persuasive. Then his suspicion turned to anger, and he shouted, "Evil wretch! First you drive him to his death, then you come here to ask his forgiveness. You don't know what it means to be sorry. The only thing you know is hate. What do you know of hate? Why don't you hate Felix, who drove me from his cottage when I was just befriending his aged father? Why don't you hate the peasant who shot me after I saved his child from drowning? I've been scorned and kicked and trampled. Isn't that reason enough to hate all mankind? Isn't that reason enough to hate all of mankind? Isn't that enough reason? You hate me too, Captain, but not as much as I hate myself for murdering innocent and helpless people who never did me any harm. But don't be frightened. The only murder I plan to commit now is my own. I will leave your ship on the ice raft that brought me here and head north to the coldest, most remote part of the globe. There, far away from the world, I will build a fire, my funeral pyre, and burn by myself my body to ashes. Then the wind will sweep those ashes into the sea, for I have no wish for any part of me to be found by a curious traveler who might attempt to create another like me. And now I say farewell, world. Farewell, Victor Frankenstein." With those words, the creature leaped through the cabin window. Robert sprang towards the window after him, but the creature was already on his ice raft, which lay close to the ship. As Robert watched, the raft was carried along by the waves. In moments, the creature was far away, lost in the darkness. Sad. That's what happens when we judge people. Call them ugly. We don't recognize the goodness within, the love, the peace within. And the fiend paid a price for that. And he killed people for revenge for the lack of love that he received. It's been a pleasure. It's been fun. Not sure what's next. We'll figure it out. Stay tuned.